Aaron James had seen the bizarre and the inexplicable in his 35 years of life. 15 of those had been spent as an Alliance Marine, fighting in the Orion conflict, where he had encountered horrors and wonders that most civilians could scarcely imagine. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was about to witness inside the Grand Hall of Artifacts on Celestia Prime. The massive domed chamber stretched out before him, its polished obsidian floors reflecting the soft blue glow of the floating light orbs above. The air carried a faint scent of preservation chemicals and something else. Something ancient, almost forgotten. Aaron adjusted the gray armored vest that clung to his frame, the only remnant of his military past that he still wore. His muscular arms remained bare in the climate-controlled environment, revealing the scar that carved down his left cheek. A silent warning to anyone foolish enough to cross him. He had built a reputation as an interstellar adventurer, a man who could get things done without asking too many questions. Impressive, isn't it? Human, came a reedy voice at his side. The tour guide, a thin, blue-skinned Celestian with 4 arms and bulbous eyes, gestured grandly toward the statues that lined the hall. These are among the finest examples of living art collected from across the 12 systems. Masterpieces of history. Aaron grunted in response, offering only the barest nod of acknowledgement. He wasn't here for an art lecture. His job was simple: retrieve a data crystal from his contact, a local whistleblower who had chosen this public venue for the exchange. The less attention he drew, the better. Still, his gaze drifted, surveying the statues with mild disinterest, until it landed on her. Unlike the other sculptures, which were stylized or exaggerated in their forms, this one was different. A humanoid female figure, carved from pale green stone with faint purple undertones. The level of detail was unnerving, from the individual strands of what should have been hair to the delicate fingers that seemed ready to move at any moment. Even the expression on her face, a serene knowing look, felt too real. "You've noticed our mysterious beauty," the guide murmured, following Aaron's gaze. "A most curious piece. There is no record of its creator in our archives, no known sculptor or artist. Some say it simply appeared in the palace one day 30 years ago." Aaron stepped closer. He didn't know why, but something about the statue pulled at him, urging him to reach out, to make contact. "There's a legend," the guide continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "They say she was once alive, a political rival of Lord Vexus himself, punished for daring to challenge his rise to power. The story goes that he used forbidden magic to imprison her in stone, making an example of her defiance." Aaron smirked. "Sounds like nonsense, perhaps," the guide mused, "but curious, don't you think, that Vexus himself ordered her displayed so prominently, as if he wanted her to be seen, forever frozen in his moment of triumph?" Aaron didn't reply. He was already reaching out before he could stop himself, his fingers brushing against the stone figure's outstretched hand. The moment his skin made contact, a warmth spread beneath his fingertips. Not cold, not lifeless, but warm alive. The stone cracked. Aaron jerked his hand away as hairline fractures spiderwebbed across the statue's surface. A faint glow pulsed from within, rhythmic like a heartbeat. The cracking intensified, fragments of stone crumbling away to reveal something beneath skin. Flesh. A deep, shuddering gasp filled the chamber as the last of the stone fell away, revealing a living, breathing woman. Her skin was a soft violet hue, her silver hair cascading down her back like liquid starlight. Her eyes, lilac and luminous, blinked rapidly as if adjusting to the light, her chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. She staggered forward, unsteady on her legs, and Aaron moved on instinct, catching her before she could collapse. Her hands grasped onto him, trembling as her lips parted to speak. Oh, her voice was hoarse, strained from disuse. "Who are you?" Before Aaron could answer, alarms blared through the hall. Security drones descended from the ceiling, red targeting lights locking onto them. Aaron swore under his breath, "I think we need to get out of here." The woman's expression darkened with sudden realization. "This is the royal palace," she breathed. How long has it been?" 30 years, Aaron told her, already slipping off his armored vest and wrapping it around her bare form. "And I'm guessing whoever put you here isn't going to be thrilled you're awake." Her lilac eye sharpened with recognition. "Vexus," she said, her voice steadier now. "He did this to me." Aaron didn't have time to process the weight of her words. The security drones had armed their weapons, the first energy blast scorching the floor, just inches from their feet. "Can you run?" he asked. She straightened, determination flashing across her face. "I've been frozen, not dead. My body remembers." "Good," Aaron muttered, grabbing her hand. "Because we're about to give these palace guards one hell of a workout." They sprinted for the nearest exit, the woman matching his stride with surprising agility despite her bare feet. Energy blasts followed them, searing the walls and floor in their wake. "I'm Aaron James, by the way," he called over the chaos as they rounded a corner. "Sarah, she replied. Sarah Vix, former royal advisor and apparently Vexus's greatest mistake. Aaron grinned despite the danger. Well, Sarah Vix, I think this is the beginning of a very interesting partnership. They burst through the palace doors and into the blinding twin suns of Celestia Prime. Here's part 2. Continuing seamlessly from where we left off, the twin suns of Celestia Prime blazed overhead, casting sharp reflections off the polished metal towers that spiraled into the cloudless sky. The spaceport, a sprawling expanse of docking bays and landing pads, gleamed in the heat like a jewel set in black stone. Aaron and Sarah moved quickly, weaving through the crowded plaza, slipping between traders, diplomats, and pilots from a dozen different worlds. Despite their desperate flight from the palace, they moved like they belonged there, though Aaron knew that wouldn't buy them much time. My ship's in orbit, Aaron said in a low voice as they ducked behind a cargo container stacked high with woven crates. Both of them were breathing hard, their shoulders pressed together as they took a moment to assess the situation. We need a way up there fast. Sarah's eyes scanned the busy port. She stood close, her silver hair catching the sunlight with every movement. His vest draped over her shoulders barely covered her, drawing curious glances from passersby. She didn't seem to notice or care. She pointed across the concourse to a sleek vessel parked at a nearby landing pad, its guards standing lazily by the ramp. She said, "Diplomatic courier shuttle, fast. Lightly guarded, well shielded." Aaron arched an eyebrow at her. "You sure about that? Been a while since you've been up to date on Starship models." "The basic designs haven't changed much," she replied, a faint smile playing at her lips. "And I was the royal technology advisor before Vexus before he did this to me." Aaron studied the shuttle. It was their best shot. He glanced at Sarah. Noticing the faint sheen of sweat on her skin, the faint flush on her cheeks, the way she stood like a woman ready to fight, despite having been trapped in stone for 3 decades. She was remarkable. "All right," he said. "We move fast and quiet. Once we're in, I'll get us clearance." A patrol of guards strode past their hiding place. Without thinking, Aaron pulled Sarah closer, shielding her body with his. Her skin was warm against his, a living contrast to the cold stone she'd been not long ago. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her breath brushing his neck. "You're doing a lot more than helping," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world around them faded. The alarms, the danger, the whole damn situation. There was something between them already, something unspoken but undeniable. It thrummed like a current in the air. Aaron forced himself to focus. "Time to move," he whispered. She nodded, her expression hardening. "On your lead." 1 at 2, Aaron's hand found hers 3. They ran. The guards were alert, but not fast enough. Aaron and Sarah slipped through the crowds, their path weaving with precise military efficiency. He took point, clearing the way, while Sarah followed with surprising grace, her bare feet making no sound on the polished stone beneath them. They reached the shuttle. Aaron popped open the maintenance panel beneath the main hatch, his fingers moving with practiced ease. Years of experience breaking into places he shouldn't have been made the task feel almost routine, almost. "Can you fly this thing?" Aaron asked as the hatch hissed open. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Better than you, I'm willing to bet." She climbed inside, her bare feet making a soft sound against the metal flooring. Aaron followed, sealing the hatch behind them just as the guards finally realized something was wrong. They shouted, weapons drawn as they sprinted toward the shuttle. "They're going to lock down the launch bay," Sarah said, sliding into the pilot's seat. Her fingers flew over the control panels with the ease of someone who belonged there. "We have 30 seconds, maybe less." Aaron dropped into the co-pilot's chair, watching her work with growing respect. "I'll handle security. You focus on getting us out of here." Sarah gave him a quick glance, her lilac eyes gleaming with something that looked like excitement. "Try to keep up, Aaron James." The shuttle's systems came online in a heartbeat. The engines hummed to life, glowing as energy flooded through the power cells. Outside, security forces surrounded the vessel, their weapons aimed, their demands blaring over the comm systems. Sarah didn't flinch. "Hang on." The shuttle shot forward with a force that slammed Aaron back in his seat. Sarah took them straight through the mag barrier with a gut-wrenching drop and a sudden climb that made his vision blur. They rocketed into the sky, leaving behind the stunned guards and the royal palace disappearing rapidly below. "Pursuit craft launching," Aaron said, checking the sensors. 3. No. 5 interceptors on our tail. Sarah's grip tightened on the controls. "Let them chase. They won't shoot us down." Aaron glanced at her. "Why's that?" "Diplomatic vessel," she explained, her mouth curving into a faint, dangerous smile. "Too many political consequences if they damage it. Vexus won't risk it yet." The first interceptor closed the gap, warning shots streaking past their hull. Sarah threw the shuttle into a spiraling dive, then cut hard to port, avoiding a missile lock by less than a meter. Aaron clung to his seat, watching as she flew with the kind of reckless precision that made most pilots break out in a cold sweat. "Where'd you learn to fly like this?" he asked. Sarah's focus never wavered. "Before I was a royal advisor, I had another life." Aaron barked a laugh despite himself. "What kind of life?" She shot him a sidelong glance, her lilac eyes flashing. "An interesting one." The thin atmosphere gave way to the deep black of space, stars blazing bright beyond the shuttle's viewport. Aaron took a breath, the weightless feeling of leaving a planet's pull never failing to bring a rush. He punched in coordinates for his ship. "The Nomad," he said, "docked at Orbital Station Gamma 3. I'm sending you the approach vector." Sarah's hands moved smoothly over the nav controls, aligning their course. Their fingers brushed briefly, and that strange electric sensation sparked between them again. Aaron froze, glancing at her. "I feel it too," Sarah said softly, not taking her eyes from the stars. "This connection." He exhaled slowly. "Not exactly normal for my species." "It's not normal for mine either." Her voice was gentle, but there was something deeper there. "We call it an aura, when two energies resonate." Before he could respond, the shuttle shook violently. A blast rocked their shields, dropping them to 70%. Sarah muttered something under her breath, correcting their course. "We need to reach your ship," she said. "No." The station came into view, its massive structure slowly rotating, the docking arms extending like the spokes of a wheel. Dozens of ships drifted nearby, but Aaron's eyes went straight to one in particular. A sleek, modified freighter painted in dark matte gray. "There," Aaron said. "Bay 42, Sarah nodded. "I see it." "They're transmitting to the station," Aaron warned, watching the comms panel. "They're ordering lockdown on all bays." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Then we don't dock." Aaron turned sharply. "You're not thinking what I think you're thinking." "I can survive vacuum," she said calmly. "Sort, you don't have a suit." "I don't need one," Sarah replied, "but my physiology can withstand it." Aaron stared at her for a beat. "You're full of surprises. You have no idea," she said, matching his intensity. She brought the shuttle alongside the Nomad, matching its speed, the hulls nearly touching. Only a few meters of empty space separated them. "Ready?" Sarah asked, fingers hovering over the decompression sequence. Aaron took a breath, his hand finding hers. "Stay, I'm not letting go," she said. The airlock opened. Silence rushed in, the emptiness of space swallowing all sound. Together, they leapt. For a brief moment, they floated between two ships, weightless and exposed. Aaron's grip was ironclad on Sarah's hand as they soared through the void. Her silver hair floated around her like a halo, and he could see the stars reflected in her eyes. There was no fear there, only trust. They landed hard against the Nomad's hull, and Aaron hauled them both inside the airlock, slamming it shut behind them. Atmosphere flooded in with a hiss, gravity snapping back into place. Sarah collapsed against him, laughing breathlessly as they tumbled onto the deck together. "I'll give you this," Aaron said, grinning despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You can keep up." Sarah's smile was radiant. "I wasn't dead, Aaron. Just waiting." The Nomad thrummed as Aaron powered up the engines, the familiar vibration under his hands. Sarah settled into the co-pilot's seat like she belonged there, studying the controls with practiced ease. He couldn't help but watch her, the way she moved, the way she adapted. "Where to now?" she asked. Aaron keyed in the course. "Anywhere but here," and with a flash they jumped into hyperspace, leaving Celestia Prime and Vexus's reach behind them. The stars stretched into lines as the Nomad slipped through hyperspace, the hum of its engines thrumming beneath Aaron's boots as he stood at the edge of the galley, watching Sarah. She sat at the small metal table, examining the heating element on a ration pack as though it was the most fascinating thing in the universe. It was a simple, self-warming meal, nutrient paste in recycled proteins, not the kind of thing you'd serve on a royal banquet table. But Sarah smiled as she watched the steam rise from the package, her lilac eyes glowing softly in the ship's muted cabin lights. "It's not much," Aaron said, pushing off from the doorframe and walking toward her. "But it'll fill you up." Sarah looked up, her fingers brushing back a lock of silver hair that had fallen across her face. She wore one of his spare flight suits, rolled up at the cuffs to fit her more slender frame. Somehow she made it look regal. "After 30 years as a statue," she said, her voice still carrying the faint rasp of disuse, "even this tastes like a feast." Aaron sat down across from her, watching her take a careful bite. Her expression flickered from cautious curiosity to quiet approval. He found himself smiling. "I can't imagine what that was like," he said after a moment. 30 years trapped like that. and aware the whole time. Sarah lowered the ration pack and studied him with that same intense gaze she'd held since the moment she'd opened her eyes in the palace. "It's like waking up in a world you almost recognize," she said softly. "But everything is different. The stars are shifted. The sounds are strange. Even taste is sharper. I can feel everything more. As if my senses are working harder to make up for what I've lost." Aaron leaned back in his seat, folding his arms across his chest. "You make it sound like you've been reborn." "In a way," she said, setting the packet aside. "But I carry the weight of what I've seen. Vexus wanted me aware while he paraded me around like a trophy. I heard his plans, his boasts, his threats. I was a silent witness to his corruption and his madness." Her eyes dropped to her hands. As if suddenly conscious of their stillness, she flexed her fingers slowly, watching the muscles move under Violet's skin. Aaron followed her gaze, then looked back at her face. "You said you were his advisor once. How did it come to this?" Her laugh was soft but bitter. "I believed in him once. We all did. Vexus was a visionary, or at least he made us believe he was. Promised a future of peace and prosperity. But power changed him, or maybe it revealed who he always was. When I uncovered the truth about his Nexus experiments, I confronted him. I told him I wouldn't help him turn dimensional theory into a weapon, so he made an example of me." Aaron exhaled slowly, staring at the table. "He turned you into a statue, an eternal reminder of his dominance," she said, her tone cold now. "And now, 30 years later, he's closer to finishing what he started." Aaron ran a hand over his shaved head. "We'll stop him. You're not his pawn anymore." She smiled faintly at that, and for a while, they sat in comfortable silence. Then, after a moment, she tilted her head at him. "You've traveled alone for a long time," she said, not as a question but a fact. Aaron nodded. "Easier that way. No one to answer to. No one to get killed because of me." Sarah studied him, her lilac gaze unflinching. "And yet you risked your life to free a stranger from stone." "You weren't a stranger," Aaron said before he could stop himself. "Not after I saw your eyes." There was a long pause. Sarah's expression softened. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her skin was warm, and he could feel the faint pulse of energy that thrummed beneath the surface. Something he was beginning to think was as much a part of her as her heartbeat. "My people believe in energy bonds," she said quietly. "Inara, a resonance between two souls, rare, precious." Aaron felt his pulse quicken under her fingers. "And you think we have that?" "I know we do," she said. "I felt it the moment your hand touched mine." He swallowed, trying to find something clever to say, but nothing came. He simply turned his hand over so her fingers slid into his palm. Their hands fit together easily, like pieces of a puzzle long separated but always meant to be joined. "I'm not exactly good at this," Aaron admitted. "Neither am I," Sarah replied. "But I'm willing to learn." They stayed that way for a while longer, hands joined, until the ship's proximity alarm sounded from the cockpit. Aaron was on his feet in an instant, his instincts kicking in. Here," he said. Sarah rose as well. "I'm coming with you." He didn't argue. He didn't think he could have stopped her if he tried. They reached the cockpit together. Aaron slid into the pilot's seat while Sarah took the co-pilot station beside him. A glance at the console confirmed his suspicion. "Control ship," Aaron said grimly. "Alliance designation, but they're on a sweep." "Looking for us?" Sarah asked. "Not directly. But if they ID'd the ship, we're burned." Sarah's fingers hovered over the sensor controls, then drifted lower. "Let me try something." Aaron watched as she touched the power rutting controls. A soft hum vibrated through the ship as she redirected the Nomad's energy signature, masking it beneath an older emissions pattern. "It won't hold forever," she said, "but it'll keep them from seeing us." The patrol ship drifted past them, oblivious. Aaron let out a slow breath and leaned back. "Remind me to thank you later," he said. Sarah's expression turned amused. "You can thank me now." "I was thinking something more personal." She smiled. "We can discuss that after we're safe." The patrol ship disappeared from their scope. Aaron shifted course, setting their destination for Outpost Helios. "We'll dock there," he said. "It's neutral territory. We can resupply, get you some real clothes, and figure out our next move." Sarah nodded, her gaze steady. "I'm with you, Aaron James." The way she said it left no room for doubt. Aaron keyed in the final commands for their jump to Helios, but before he hit the sequence, Sarah's hand brushed his. "Aaron," she said quietly. He turned to her, surprised by the sudden change in her tone. Her eyes were serious now, her gaze searching his. "I will not let Vexus take me again." "He won't," Aaron said without hesitation. "Not while I'm breathing." She nodded as if that settled something inside her. Then she leaned in, her lips brushing his cheek, the faintest whisper of contact. It wasn't a kiss, not really, but it sent a jolt down his spine. "Thank you," she whispered. Aaron keyed in the final jump. Stars stretched around them as the nomad leapt into hyperspace once more, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the woman sitting beside him. A woman who had been stoned for 30 years, who carried knowledge and scars from a lifetime he could barely imagine. And yet somehow they fit together, like they were always meant to. Outpost Helios loomed ahead, a tarnished coin against the stars. Aaron guided the nomad toward the docking bay as Sarah looked on, curiosity and wariness mingling in her expression. "Not exactly a royal welcome," Aaron said. Sarah smiled faintly. "After 30 years of silence, anything is better." They docked without incident, magnetic clamps securing the nomad in place. As the airlock hissed open, Sarah paused. "What rules govern a place like this?" she asked. Aaron looked at her, his expression grim. "Don't trust anyone. Don't look anyone in the eye unless you're ready for a fight. And never show fear." Sarah nodded once, her gaze sharpening. Understood. They stepped into the chaos of Helios Station side by side. The air inside Outpost Helios was thick with the mingled scents of machine oil, roasted meats, and too many bodies crowded into too small a space. The station was old, older than Aaron cared to guess, and it showed. Bulkheads streaked with rust, flickering overhead lights barely illuminating narrow passageways, and layers of grime on every surface gave the place the feel of something long past its prime. But it was still alive. Merchants shouted over one another in a dozen languages, peddling their wares from cluttered stalls. Pilots, smugglers, and bounty hunters rubbed shoulders at bars and gambling tables. And through it all, Sarah walked at Aaron's side, her gaze soaking it in as if she was seeing life for the first time. She kept close to him as they wove their way through the throng, her hand brushing his occasionally, as if to ground herself. Her silver hair was tied back in a loose braid that trailed down her back, and the dark blue flight suit Aaron had bought for her fit snugly, the silver detailing catching the neon lights from the vendor signs above. "Helios hasn't changed much," Aaron muttered, scanning the faces around them. "Still a place where laws come to die." Sarah gave him a sidelong glance, her violet eyes curious. "And yet you brought me here." "It's neutral ground," he replied. "Nobody asks questions. And if you have the credits, you can get anything you need." She arched a brow. "And what are we here to get?" Aaron's expression hardened. "Answers." They passed a group of armored mercenaries clustered around a holographic map, weapons slung across their backs. One of them glanced their way, his helmet visor tilting just enough to register interest. Aaron moved closer to Sarah, his fingers brushing the small of her back, a silent signal to stay alert. They found what they were looking for near the back of the concourse. A small shop front, recessed into the wall, its door half hidden beneath a canopy of old cabling. A flickering sign above the entrance read simply, "Tech Salvage." Inside, the smell of ozone was stronger, and the glow of interface devices and diagnostic scanners filled the cramped space. The merchant was insectoid, with 6 arms and compound eyes that reflected light like glass beads. When it saw them enter, it clicked its mandibles and scuttled forward. "Welcome, travelers," it said, its voice a rasping buzz. "Looking to buy, or perhaps sell?" Sarah's gaze sharpened as she stepped forward, pointing to a display of sleek, silver devices lined up behind the counter. "Those," she said. "Where did you get them?" The merchant's antenna twitched. Very rare. Psychometric resonators from the VIX Collective. Salvaged legally. Very valuable." "From where?" Sarah pressed. "Which vessel?" The merchant tapped a clawed finger on the counter. "An abandoned research ship, the drifting beyond Celestia's reach. Claimed under salvage," documented. "All legal." Aaron noticed the tension in Sarah's posture. Her hands curled slightly at her sides, her breathing shallow but controlled. He stepped up beside her, his tone casual but firm. "We'll take one." "Expensive?" the merchant warned. "Very expensive." Aaron slid a credit sheet across the counter. "This enough." The merchant snatched it up with 2 hands while the others carefully packed the device into a shock-proof case. As it worked, Sarah's voice dropped low. "Those were prototypes," she said. "Experimental when I was still before. They were designed to help restore lost memories, heal trauma. But they could be used differently." "Like how?" Aaron asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. She met his eyes, her expression grim. "If someone was trapped in stasis or stone, these devices could extract everything they experienced while they were imprisoned." Aaron felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You were aware the whole time?" Sarah nodded slowly. "And I heard everything, conversations, secrets, plans. Vexa spoke freely around me because he thought I was nothing more than an object. I need to access those memories." "You sure about that?" Aaron asked quietly. "Could be painful. I've endured worse," she said, her voice steady. "And it's the only way we can figure out what Vexus is planning." Aaron didn't argue. He simply took the case from the merchant and gave a nod of thanks. They left the shop and made their way back through the concourse, but they hadn't gone far before Sarah stiffened beside him. "Aaron," she murmured. He followed her gaze. Across the market, a group of station security officers was moving information, checking IDs and credentials. Behind them, walking with casual confidence, was a figure in chrome armor, its helmet visor shaped like a skull. A Chronos Guild tracker, Aaron swore under his breath. Bounty hunter. Sarah's fingers found his, squeezing briefly. Vexus must have raised the bounty. They slipped into a maintenance corridor, moving fast but careful not to attract attention. Aaron's mind raced. They needed to get back to the Nomad, but the docks would be locked down soon if they weren't already. "We need a distraction," Aaron said. "I can create one," Sarah replied. "My bioelectric field can disrupt nearby systems. Short-range interference. Won't that make you a target?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Isn't that the point?" Aaron caught her wrist, turning her toward him. "I'm not losing you again." Her expression softened. "Then stay close." He took a breath, then nodded. "I've got an idea." They split up. Aaron made his way back toward the merchant's stalls, moving casually as if he was just another buyer. He adjusted his collar as he passed one of the comm hubs. A pre-arranged signal. Sarah was already at the far end of the concourse, her hand resting lightly against a control panel. Her eyes closed for a moment, and then the lights flickered. An alarm blared. Security systems glitched, doors locking and unlocking at random. The crowd panicked. Merchants grabbed their goods. Civilians ran for cover. Station security scrambled to regain control. And in the chaos, the Chronos tracker turned its head toward the disturbance, moving away from the docks. Aaron didn't waste the opportunity. He ducked behind a food stall, slipping through a maintenance hatch that led toward the docking bays. Sarah met him at the junction, her breathing steady despite the strain he could feel radiating from her. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "But we need to move." They sprinted through the maintenance corridors, Sarah leading the way this time. She moved like she could sense the flow of power through the station's veins, guiding them through the twists and turns without hesitation. They nearly collided with a maintenance worker rounding a corner. He stared at them for a heartbeat, his hand going to his comm unit. But before he could activate it, Sarah stepped forward, placing her hands on either side of his head. "Sleep," she said softly. The worker's eyes fluttered closed and he slumped against the wall. Aaron stared at her. "You've got more tricks than a mercenary magician." She smiled faintly as they moved on. "I told you I was more than an advisor." They reached the docking bay as the station's lockdown procedures began. Alarms shrieked. Bulkheads sealed. Aaron overrode the Nomad's airlock with a stolen access code, and they tumbled inside, both of them panting with exertion but alive. Sarah clutched the neural device to her chest as Aaron brought the ship's engines online. They launched with a shudder, weaving through station traffic before jumping to hyperspace. For a long time, they said nothing. Aaron guided the ship away from the outpost while Sarah sat quietly, her hands resting on the device that might hold the key to saving everything. Later, in the small medical bay, Sarah lay back on the reclined chair. The neural device's smooth silver arcs encased her temples. Aaron stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I do," she replied, meeting his gaze. "I need to remember. We need to know." He nodded, squeezing her hand. "I'll be right here." She closed her eyes and he activated the device. At first, nothing happened. Then her body tensed, her breathing going shallow. Aaron watched as her fingers curled tighter around his, her knuckles white. Minutes passed, long and agonizing, before she exhaled sharply and opened her eyes. "The Nexus key," she whispered. "Vexus is looking for the Nexus key." Aaron frowned. "What is it?" "Odd-dimensional gateway device," she said. "It can tear holes between realities. If Vexus finishes it, he could open rifts to other worlds or destroy them." Aaron felt his stomach twist. "What does he need to finish it?" Sarah's expression darkened. "The blood of a Vix who's transcended physical form. My blood." Aaron's hands tightened reflexively. "That's why he kept you alive. Turned you to stone. He's been waiting for you." She nodded. "And now he knows I'm free." Aaron drew in a breath, steadying himself. "Then we finish this." Sarah's hand found his, her fingers warm and strong. Together, they sat in silence for a moment, their hands joined. Then Aaron stood and checked their heading. "We'll need help. I'm sending a message to Commander Holt." Sarah watched him, her eyes steady. "And after?" He turned, his gaze meeting hers. "After we stop Vexus." The stars shimmered beyond the Nomad's cockpit as Aaron sent out the encrypted transmission. His fingers moved swiftly over the controls, bypassing comm buoys to conceal their location. Across from him, Sarah sat quiet, her posture poised and patient. though Aaron could sense the energy thrumming beneath her skin. She had always been composed, but now knowing what Vexus was planning, there was a different kind of intensity in her eyes. Purpose. The transmission was short and to the point. Commander Holt wouldn't need a lengthy explanation. The evidence Sarah retrieved from her own mind was already uploaded and encrypted, enough proof to make any Alliance counselor choke on their self-righteousness. If Holt didn't act on it, no one would. Aaron knew better than to place faith in bureaucrats, but Holt was different. Holt was a soldier like him, a man who understood what was at stake. Aaron finished the message and sat back in his chair. The ship hummed around them, a quiet, steady sound that had been his only company for years. Now it was different. He wasn't alone in the silence anymore. "He'll come," Sarah said, her voice steady. "You trust him." Aaron glanced at her. "I do." Sarah tilted her head slightly as if weighing something unseen. "And me." Aaron met her gaze without hesitation. "More than I should." That made her smile, though there was something bittersweet in the curve of her lips. She rose from her seat and crossed the narrow space between them, resting a hand on his shoulder. He could feel the warmth of her skin through his shirt, the faint pulse of energy that always seemed to hum beneath her touch. His hand lifted, covering hers. "We'll stop him," Aaron said, more to himself than her. "Vexus doesn't win this time." Her fingers curled around his shoulder gently. "He won't. Not if we move quickly." Aaron turned his chair to face her, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched between them, charged and expectant. He found himself studying her face, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her silver hair caught the dim light of the console displays. It was a face that had endured things most couldn't comprehend, and yet here she was, standing with him in a stolen moment of calm before everything changed. "You said something before," Aaron said quietly, "about between your content." "Inura," Sarah corrected softly. "A resonance of energy. Two souls recognizing each other." But Aaron's fingers found hers again, lacing together. "Feels a lot like gravity. Can't escape it." "Not sure I want to." Sarah's lips twitched at the corners. "You think this is something to escape from?" "Not anymore," he said, and meant it. They stood like that until the ship's comm pinged with a new message. Holt's reply. Aaron broke away first, reading the data as it scrolled across the screen. "He's sending a team. Aerontral space. Proxima 4. Abandoned temple. He says it's remote enough for a covered op." Sarah's brow lifted. "A temple." Aaron nodded. "Probably pre-alliance. No one goes there anymore." She stepped back, her expression shifting into something thoughtful. "It could work." He frowned slightly. "You're thinking of something." She gave him a long look, then nodded. "An old technique. Vix bioalchemy. I can put myself back into stasis." Aaron blinked. "What? Why would you do that?" Sarah took a slow breath, as if measuring the words carefully before releasing them. "But Vexus wants me alive, but transformed. If he believes I've been recaptured and returned to stone, he'll come. He'll have to see for himself." Aaron stared at her, a protest already forming in his throat, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "I'll be in control this time," she said. "Not like before. It's a conscious choice. A meditation that hardens my body, but my mind stays free. And if something goes wrong?" Aaron asked, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. Her gaze softened. "You'll find me. You did before." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "I'm not sure I can watch you turn yourself into a statue again." Sarah's hand found his face, her palm warm against his skin. "You won't be watching. You'll be planning the next step. And when Vexus comes, you'll be ready." He closed his eyes for a second, leaning into her touch. "I'm not losing you. I need you to believe that." "I do," she said softly. "And I'm not leaving you." They set the course for Proxima 4, and during the journey, Aaron modified their weapons, checked their gear, and rechecked the Nomad systems. Anything to keep his hands busy, his mind from circling the same thoughts. He hated waiting. Always had. But this was different. This was Sarah's plan, and he trusted her. She spent the hours meditating, her posture graceful, her breathing slow and deep. Aaron watched her sometimes when she didn't notice. Or maybe she did. He wasn't sure. She sat cross-legged in the center of the Nomad's cargo hold, the lights dimmed to a soft glow. Her skin shimmered faintly, as if reflecting something just beneath the surface. When they reached orbit over Proxima 4, Aaron guided the Nomad toward the ancient temple ruins. They found Holt's team already waiting. 3 operatives in matte black armor, their helmets off. Expressions serious. Holt wasn't with them, but Aaron wasn't surprised. A commander couldn't risk direct involvement in something this off the books. The temple was quiet, its stone columns rising toward a sky thick with clouds. Ancient symbols carved deep into the stone glowed faintly, remnants of a time when the stars were still young. "This place has power." Sarah said softly, stepping into the central chamber. Her fingers brushed the markings on one of the pillars, and for a moment, they seemed to pulse faintly at her touch. Aaron worked alongside her, sketching a containment circle on the floor with luminescent chalk, while Sarah whispered words in the ancient Vix language. Her voice was low, melodic, rising and falling like a song he couldn't quite understand but felt in his bones. "You sure this will work?" he asked for the third time. She gave him a faint smile. "Wes." Aaron didn't have to. Instead, he helped her step into the center of the circle. She stripped down to bare skin, and even though he'd seen her body before, it still made his chest tighten. But this wasn't about desire, this was about reverence, about trust. "So I begin," she said, kneeling in the center of the circle. "You can't break the seal until the ritual is complete." "I'll be here," Aaron promised. Her silver hair spilled over her shoulders as she closed her eyes, her breathing slowing again. The air around her thickened, the temperature dropping slightly. He watched as her skin began to change, darkening into a deeper violet, then taking on the faint sheen of polished stone. It started at her feet, then crept upward, encasing her legs, her hips, her torso. The last to go was her face, her expression peaceful. Her lips curved faintly as if she was smiling for him and him alone. And then she was stone. Aaron stood there for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then he exhaled, forced himself to turn away, and joined Holt's team outside the temple. "Prep the perimeter," Aaron ordered. "This is where Vexus comes to die." Hours passed. The tension wound tighter with every minute. Holt's team worked silently, setting up scanners and defense fields. Aaron checked and rechecked their gear, his jaw tight. And then, just before dusk, the scanners lit up. "Approach vector confirmed," one of the operatives said. "Multiple contacts." Aaron slid his rifle into place over his shoulder. The positions. A sleek shuttle descended through the clouds, settling just outside the temple grounds. It was black, polished, unmarked. The kind of transport that carried power and authority. Aaron's gut clenched as the ramp descended and a line of guards stepped out, weapons in hand. And then came Vexus. He was taller than Aaron expected, his features sharp and angular, his silver robes flowing around him like smoke. His eyes were amber, cold and bright, and they swept over the temple grounds with disdain. "You have something that belongs to me," Vexus said, his voice smooth and rich like poisoned honey. Aaron stepped forward, gun resting easy in his hands. "You mean someone." Vexus' gaze flicked to Aaron and his mouth curved faintly. "The famous Aaron James. I was told you were difficult," Aaron said. Vexus nodded to his guards. "Show me." Aaron led him inside the temple, his pulse pounding in his ears. Vexus stopped before Sarah's stone form, his hand hovering just above her cheek. "Beautiful," he murmured. "As she should be." Aaron's grip tightened on his weapon. Not for long. Vexus's smile was thin. "We'll see." He turned toward Aaron. "She will be delivered to my facility. I'll oversee the extraction myself." "That's not going to happen," Aaron said. Vexus sighed, as if bored. "You cannot stop what is coming, human. The Nexus key will open the door to a new age. She is the last piece." Aaron didn't answer. He squeezed the trigger. Chaos erupted in an instant. Holt's team sprang from cover, weapons blazing. Vexus's guards scattered, returning fire. Aaron moved fast, diving behind the temple pillar as energy bolts scorched the stone. And through it all, Sarah waited. The temple shook with the force of the firefight raging through its crumbling halls. Flashes of energy lit the ancient stonework as Vexus's guards exchanged blasts with Holt's operatives. Aaron moved through it all like a shadow, his weapon steady, his focus absolute. He'd been in dozens of battles in his time, maybe hundreds, but none of them had ever felt like this. This wasn't just about survival. This was about keeping his promise. Sarah was still there, in the center of the temple, encased in stone, waiting. Vexus stood just beyond the perimeter of the fight, untouched by the chaos, his hands clasped neatly behind his back as if this was all a minor inconvenience. His eyes flickered to Sarah's stone form, and Aaron could see the hunger there, the desperation that Vexus worked so hard to keep hidden beneath his polished exterior. "Aaron." Holt's voice snapped in his ear through the calm. "We've got incoming. Another wave of Vexus's troops. We can't hold this position much longer." But Aaron's gaze flicked to the horizon where the dark shapes of incoming shuttles were already cutting through the clouds. "We don't need to hold it," he said. "We just need to finish this." He broke from cover, sprinting across the open space between the columns, ignoring the hiss of plasma bolts as they streaked past. Vexus's guards turned, shouting, firing, but Aaron was already moving too fast. He closed the distance between himself and Vexus in seconds. Vexus didn't move. He simply tilted his head slightly, watching Aaron approach with a cool detachment that was almost unnerving. "You think this is bravery?" Vexus asked as Aaron raised his weapon. Its futility. Aaron fired. The bolt should have torn straight through Vexus's chest, but it hit nothing. The projection shimmered and vanished, a decoy. Too late, Aaron sensed the danger behind him. He turned, but Vexus was already there, stepping out of the shadows. His hand lashed out, striking Aaron with a pulse of energy that sent him sprawling across the stone floor. His rifle skidded out of reach. Vexus walked toward him slowly, unhurried. "I admire your tenacity," he said. "But it was always going to end this way." Aaron pushed himself up on one elbow, gritting his teeth against the pain. "You really love the sound of your own voice, don't you?" Vexus crouched in front of him, his amber eyes gleaming. "The Nexus key is almost complete. Sarah's blood will stabilize the final resonance. A new age will dawn. I will rule over all realities." Aaron spat on the ground between them. "You're insane." "No," Vexus said softly. "I'm inevitable." The pulse of energy started to rise then, a low hum that vibrated through the stones beneath them. Aaron realized it was coming from Sarah. Her stone form, once still and silent, was beginning to glow. Light pulsed through the cracks in the surface, faintest then brighter. Vexus turned sharply. "No," he whispered. "It's too soon." Aaron grinned through the pain. "Not soon enough." The stone that encased Sarah shattered in an instant, fragments exploding outward in a burst of violet light. She stood tall in the center of the chaos, silver hair streaming behind her, her skin glowing faintly with energy. Her lilac eyes locked on Vexus, and for the first time, Aaron saw fear flash across the High Chancellor's face. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," Sarah said. Vexus recovered quickly, raising his hand to summon another blast of energy. But Sarah was faster. Her palm shot forward, releasing a surge of raw bioelectric power that hit him square in the chest. He flew backward, slamming into a stone column with bone-shattering force. Aaron pushed himself to his feet as Sarah strode toward Vexus. "He's not going to stop," Aaron said. "Even if we finish him here." Sarah nodded once. "Then we destroy the Nexus key." Holt's team was already falling back toward the temple, the outer perimeter overrun by Vexus's reinforcements. "We need to move," Holt barked. "They've got us pinned. We got one shot at this," Aaron said as Sarah reached for him. "If we take out the key, the power draw should destroy everything connected to it, including Vexus." Sarah agreed. They ran together, side by side, moving through the temple like a force of nature. Holt's team covered them as they reached the platform where the Nexus key prototype had been hastily assembled by Vexus's followers. The massive ring-shaped device pulsed with unstable energy, the air around it warping and twisting. Reality itself seemed thin here, fragile. "He's already activated," Sarah said grimly. "It's unstable. We make it more unstable," Aaron replied. Sarah placed her hands on the control interface, her fingers moving with impossible speed. "If I can reverse the energy flow, we can create a feedback loop." "You sure?" Aaron asked. She glanced at him, the barest flicker of a smile on her lips. "No." Aaron took up position at the entrance to the chamber, firing back at the advancing guards as Sarah worked. Energy blasts scorched the air around them, and Holt's team was already taking hits. They wouldn't last much longer. "It's ready?" Sarah shouted over the noise. "But I need a power source." Aaron was already moving. He pulled the power core from his own weapon, tossing it to her. "Will this do?" She caught it one-handed. "Perfect." She slammed the core into the interface, and the Nexus key screamed. The sound wasn't like anything Aaron had ever heard. A twisting, a wrenching sound that seemed to come from inside his own bones. The ring began to collapse inward, the center warping as the portal destabilized. Vexus staggered to his feet, his face twisted in rage. "No, you can't stop it." He lunged toward Sarah, but Aaron intercepted him, slamming into the High Chancellor with the full weight of his body. They crashed to the ground, grappling for control. Vexus was strong, inhumanly so, his fingers closing around Aaron's throat with crushing force. "You are nothing," Vexus hissed. "Just a broken soldier. You should have died on some forgotten battlefield." Aaron fought to keep his vision clear, his hands scrambling for anything to use. "Yeah," he rasped. "But then I met her." His fingers closed around the hilt of a discarded blade, and he drove it into Vexus's side. The High Chancellor's eyes widened in shock, his grip loosening just enough for Aaron to shove him away. Sarah was already at Aaron's side, pulling him up as the Nexus key reached critical mass. Light poured from the device, searing and blinding. Sarah shouted. They ran. Holt's team was already falling back toward the shuttle, dragging one of their wounded with them. Aaron and Sarah followed, sprinting through the crumbling ruins as the ground shook beneath their feet. The Nexus key imploded behind them with a soundless explosion, the air rushing inward as if the universe itself was taking a breath. They made it to the shuttle just ahead of the blast wave. Aaron hauled Sarah inside, slamming the hatch shut as the shockwave hit. The shuttle rocked violently, but its shields held barely. For a long moment, no one spoke. They were breathing hard, bloodied and exhausted, but alive. Holt broke the silence first. "I'll be damned." Aaron leaned back against the wall, his arm sliding around Sarah as she sat beside him. "We stopped him," he said. "That's all that matters." Sarah nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. For now, later, back aboard the Nomad, they drifted through the quiet of space, the stars peaceful beyond the viewport. Sarah stood at the helm, her hands light on the controls, her silver hair unbound, flowing over her shoulders. Aaron watched her for a long moment before stepping up beside her. "Where to?" She glanced at him, her eyes soft but steady. "Wherever we want," he smiled at that. "I could get used to this." She turned to face him fully, her hands finding his. "Among my people," she said softly, "when two souls are bound by Inara, it is believed they will always find each other, across time, across space. No matter how many lifetimes pass." Aaron brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. "Sounds like something I can believe in." She smiled. "Good." He leaned in, their foreheads touching as they stood together at the helm. The Nomad drifted onward through the stars, carrying them toward whatever came next. They had defied fate, broken free from the chains of the past, and forged something new. Together. And as they vanished into the darkness between worlds, Aaron knew one thing for certain. He had found his way home.